What's up, guys? This is Mr. Eldridge, and in today's video, we're going to look at the civil rights movement. One of the keys to the civil rights movement was the willingness and reasonability of the Supreme Court and Congress to proactively dismantle the explicit institutional, state-level, racial, and gender discrimination laws. While presidents were often sympathetic at heart, there was little they could do, given the executive power limitations, interpretive changes on laws, and the formation of the new laws had to go through the Supreme Court and Congress, respectively. Additionally, civil rights was a charged topic, and a strong stance by any president would likely result in that they would lose crucial support for re-election. Nonetheless, some presidents did exercise what power they had to combat racial and gender discrimination. In the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Earl Warren would lead the court to many unanimous votes regarding the protection of individual rights and equal opportunity regardless of race or sex. The series of pro-civil rights decisions in the 1950s and 1960s is an era referred to as the Warren Court. Such examples include Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, which ended segregation in schools, and Loving versus Virginia in 1967. This decision forbade the state-level ban of interracial marriage and others. While Congress had no clear civil rights leader, it was composed almost entirely of white males who, at the bequest of the president, such as Lyndon Baines Johnson, and the American public, moved to protect individuals against racial and gender discrimination explicitly. Such laws include the Equal Pay Act of 1963 that banned pay discrimination based on sex, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which banned discrimination based on race, sex, religion, and others, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which removed all legal barriers to vote, many of which targeted blacks. Such success was achieved largely due to the peaceful protest efforts of the civil rights movement, as well as national media coverage made more effective on TV. The civil rights movement itself adopted a peaceful approach following the Montgomery Bus Boycott victory in the mid-1950s, when Rosa Parks was arrested for not giving up her seat for a white passenger. Martin Luther King Jr. organized a peaceful boycott composed of blacks, Jews, sympathetic whites, and others. By practicing nonviolence, the boycott forced the busing system to desegregate by starving it of necessary funds. The victory sparked a larger movement to end racial discrimination peacefully. Inspired by the nonviolent civil disobedience practices of Mahatma Gandhi, the civil rights movement would employ a variety of tactics. In addition to boycotts, the civil rights movement also employed sit-ins, which focused mainly on college-age students occupying segregated seats peacefully in restaurants and other venues. The protesters were trained not to retaliate, antagonize, or respond to harassment, such as being spit on, punched, shoved, verbally harassed, having food or drinks thrown on them, or cigarettes burnt out on them. These sit-ins were organized across the states by the Student Non-Coordinating Committee, and their local and national news coverage drew indignation from the less racially divided parts of the West, Midwest, and Northern United States. In addition, protests, demonstrations, marches, and speeches were used to increase awareness and show a unified front for change. With 250,000 marchers descending on Washington, D.C., the March on Washington in 1963 had ensuing speeches and are regarded as influential to the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Additionally, the marches from Selma to Montgomery in opposition to the literacy tests and other limitations of prospective black voters, and the violent opposition inflicted by the state troopers and covered by the national news were influential in hastening the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Also see our video on Bloody Sunday for more. While some reformers were satisfied with the progress of civil rights leaders in the 1950s and 1960s, a sizable minority of blacks began to criticize the pace and opposition to civil rights progress. For example, in the summer of 1962, more than 150 skirmishes and riots occurred as many blacks became increasingly frustrated with civil rights progress and turned to violence as a means of achieving their goals. These instances of violence, however, merely polarized many conservatives against the civil rights movement as a part of a larger communist plot to foment instability and division. In 1966, the Black Power movement, this is a movement that emphasized racial pride, economic empowerment, and the creation of political and cultural institutions for blacks. This began as many blacks felt liberal reforms were too little, too late. Leaders such as Malcolm X adopted Islam and rejected integration, arguing instead that blacks with a superior race should remain segregated and separate from whites and take back their communities, using violence as a necessary means to achieve their goals. It's also important to see Malcolm X's speech called "The Ballot or the Bullet." Additionally, the Black Panthers began in the 1960s in Oakland, California as a paramilitary group bent on defending themselves violently against the systematic racism that was in place. Even the SNCC, a previously peaceful and integrated civil disobedience group, began to radicalize and transition into a black-only activist group. Along with the civil rights movement, you next have to talk about the second wave of feminism. For women, the call for equality of opportunity and protection of individual rights came in the 1960s and 1970s. Writers such as Betty Friedan, writer of The Feminine Mystique, and Simone de Beauvoir, writer of The Second Sex of France, suggested that some women were not happy with being pigeonholed as housewives. Many were desiring to be involved with the family in other ways, pursuing careers and having educational opportunities, and that they had been treated as second-class citizens. These women moved appropriately for equality of opportunity in the economy and politics. Women were also emboldened and able to resonate with these ideals due to the emergence of several technological innovations. First, the birth control pill gave women consistent control of the reproductive capacities for the first time in human history. This meant women could pursue careers, education, or delay child rearing until they were ready, or in a minority of cases, chose not to have children at all, rather than being arbitrarily subject to unwanted or untimely pregnancies. This was further aided by the legislation and the legalization of abortions in the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court case in 1973. Additionally, for those women who did choose to have families, household appliances left housewives with far more spare time to pursue their own family, career, or educational interests. The inventions of appliances such as the washing machine, microwave, dishwasher, and others reduced household chore time from a pre-World War II average of 6 to 8 hours per day to 2 to 3 hours per day on average. The movement for equality of opportunity would continue into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, appropriately fighting for equality of the LGBTQ plus community, and perhaps less clearly for the environment, which both sides of the political spectrum continue to debate to this day. With a spirit of equality, a bipartisan desire to expand immigration beyond the tight, racism-fueled constraints of the Immigration Act of 1924 and the National Origins Formula, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 was a law that abolished the national origins formula, which had been the basis for U.S. immigration policy since the 1920s. During the 1960s, at the height of the civil rights movement, the national origins formula increasingly came under attack for being racially discriminatory. With the support of the Johnson administration and key members of Congress, the bill received wide support from both Democratic and Republican congressmen, and Johnson signed the bill into law in 1965. As a result, immigration from Asia, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Latin America greatly increased. The rights of Latin American agricultural workers also benefited from the presence and efforts of Cesar Chavez, an American labor leader and civil rights activist who founded the National Farm Workers Association in 1962. Originally a Mexican-American farm worker, Chavez became best known for his work as a Latin American civil rights activist and was strongly promoted by the American labor movement, which was eager to enroll Hispanic members. His public relations approach to unionism and aggressive but nonviolent tactics made the farm workers' struggle a moral cause with nationwide support. By the late 1970s, his tactics had forced growers to recognize his organization as the bargaining agent for 50,000 field workers in California and Florida. Thank you so much for paying attention to this video. If you have not subscribed to this channel, please go ahead and do so now. Thank you so much, and have a great day.